The opinions expressed by guests of this show are their own and do not necessarily align with those of us here at the Animal Soulmates podcast.
At that time, I was about to graduate and come to the US, and my first thought was like, I don't want to do anything else. I just want to lay here and die with him, But then I thought, I'm not going to be doing him any good if I quit my life. That the only reason I took him to get neutered is because I was leaving the country. So if now I don't do that, I'm not doing him justice, I'm just going to quit, and his life will be, there's no meaning of it. If I don't go now, I have to go.
Welcome to the Animal Soulmates podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Abbie Viscardi. I'm an animal welfare scientist and, more importantly, an obsessed dog mom. I believe that the unconditional love and connection that we share with our animals is more powerful than we realize. This podcast will honor the stories of these amazing creatures that have walked with us and changed our lives forever. So join me, and together we will explore the true power of the human-animal bond. Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Animal Soulmates podcast. I am so excited that you are here. I have so many amazing guests lined up this season. I've just had incredible conversations up to this point, and I just cannot wait to share it with you here. A couple things before we get started. I will be having one of my dogs serve as co-host for each episode, and I felt like it was only fair ahead of the episode that I acknowledge them. And so for this first episode, my pit bull from New York named Frank Sinatra was the co-host. He was an absolute perfect gentleman throughout the recording, so you probably won't hear much of him in the background. And I'll probably do a proper introduction of each of my co-hosts on our official Instagram page for the podcast, which is at Animal Soulmates Pod on Instagram. And so you'll be able to go there and actually see pictures and videos of them. But I felt like it was only fair to introduce them ahead of the episode. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that I had a very stubborn bronchitis when we recorded this episode and had actually lost my voice a few days before we recorded, which really was impeccable timing to start a new project that was essentially audio only when I didn't have a voice. But anyways, please bear with me through this episode. It gets a lot better and a lot clearer in episode 2, but it is kind of a little rocky for this episode. I could not be more grateful to my first guest here, Dr. Eduarda Bortoluzzi on the Animal Soulmates podcast. I first met Eduarda in the fall of 2018 when she was completing her master's degree, and we became friends very quickly. I think most of you have probably experienced the connection that you have kind of automatically with animal people, and I certainly felt that the first time I met Eduarda. She was interested in animal behavior and animal welfare, which is what I had my PhD in. And we just clicked right away. There was sort of like that instant connection. Eduarda received her vet degree from the Federal University of Pampa in Brazil, so before she came to the US. And she also completed a PhD in animal behavior and welfare in July of 2022. I am honestly beyond happy to have her as a colleague. She is the type of person that we need in this field to improve our animals' lives. So prior to our conversation, I knew that she had an animal soulmate, and she was such a gift to me when I lost Amira, my animal soulmate. I think it just was her recognizing my grief in herself, and she just really helped me through a raw, really hard time in my life, and I could not be more thankful to her for that. Eduarda is such a kind, beautiful person that I am so lucky to have in my life. Her story is very powerful, So please grab some tissues ahead of time and enjoy episode 1, A Pug Named Dexter.
I'm Eduarda Bortoluzzi, and I grew up in São Miguel do Oeste, Santa Catarina, Brazil.
And what was your childhood like growing up in Brazil?
It was good. I had a lot of fun. My parents were divorced, so I think I got a lot of attention from both sides and also from my grandparents. So I spent a lot of time with my grandfather on my mom's side, which I think kind of influenced how I like animals because he had a farm. So he would take us out to see the cows. He had one cow for each one of his grandchildren. So that was fun. We could name the cows and yeah, we had fun. It was a fun time.
Did you have animals growing up in your own household?
Well, when I lived with my mom and dad at our place, we had one dog. She was mainly like a yard dog. She ran away one day and we looked all over for her. We couldn't find her. So that was like very touchy for me because after that, they didn't want to give me another animal just because it was painful to watch me go through the loss of an animal. So I would just like name all the animals I saw with her name. And then they were like, yeah, we're not doing this again. It's too much. So then after that, my mom thought maybe I needed another dog. So we got a dog from a couple that they were military. They were being deployed to another country, I think. So they had like a tiny poodle. So we end up taking her and she was like my main dog as I was growing up. Lala. So we had her for the longest time. But then my mom and I used to live in an apartment and we couldn't have dogs all the time because she would bark. So she lived in a friend's house for the longest time, but we would come visit her like every day or whenever we could. So we still had that bond. And then when we moved to a house, she came with us. So I had a good experience with her, but she just got into a lot of trouble all the time. She would bite frogs outside and then get kind of poisoned with it or, just so then is where I started saying, I always wanted to be a vet, but at that time I was like, I just want to be a vet so I know what to do if something like that happens, because we always had to call someone to come and rescue her. So that kind of drove me into, I want to be able to help animals, or if I see an animal that is outside and it's suffering, I just want to be able to do something for them. So that kind of drove me into why I wanted to work with small animals at the time.
It might be a little too soon for this question, but how is the companion animal situation different in Brazil than here in North America?
It's very different because we have a lot of stray dogs. So the streets in Brazil have a lot of dogs. My city in particular does not have a lot because the government and the public laws kind of take care of it. We also have organizations that take care of those stray animals, and we try our best to not have animals in the streets. But it's still seen as the animals are still seen as just animals outside, not like part of the family as much as in here. It changed a lot in the last couple years. There's still a lot of like yard dogs and dogs that never come inside, or they are just for protection, that type of things. If you move around Brazil a little bit, like my university town, there's strays all over. So we would name the strays because we would see them every day. They were kind of like community dogs that everybody would feed. And it becomes a problem because we have a lot of zoonotic diseases, and then we have a lot of ticks because of the weather. But we knew all of the animals. So one of them, he's still alive to this day, which is, to me, it's crazy. Since I went to vet school, he would just be like inside of the bank because it was where they had air conditioning. And the people would let him come in, and lay on their floor. And so now that he's like older, he needs more care. Someone adopted him, and she has like a page on Instagram so I can keep seeing how he's doing. But he would follow us. He would kind of walk with, especially with girls, kind of like a protection, like a bodyguard for us. So he was the best. But it's a very different situation that we have here in US compared to Brazil. We have a lot more trouble with small animals being on the street.
And so you talked about zoonotic diseases. What, just for the audience who is unfamiliar, what are zoonotic diseases?
So zoonotic diseases are those diseases that can pass from animals to humans or from humans to animals. So things that we would share as a disease, or sometimes parasites that could be in animals that end up in humans, depending on how they're handled.
So I guess we can jump into your story with Dexter. So when and how did Dexter come into your life?
So Dexter came in my life, I think it was my second year of vet school. I had animals at home. I always had animals, always had dogs, but I lived 15 hours away from my hometown. And by the time that I left, my mom didn't want me to take in any animals just because she wasn't sure how it was going to be and if I would have any time to take care of an animal. So my animals stayed back home. I had only a dog at that time, but so I was always saying how I miss having a dog around and having that bond with an animal. So I had a friend that actually gave me Dexter. I never thought I was going to like a pug because, I was a vet. Pugs have a lot of health issues. And I thought they were kind of ugly, to be honest. But then I got Dexter and he was the best dog ever. He had such a good personality. The first day I had him, he just learned how to crawl up off the bed, and he would come and sleep with me, snuggle with me. He would never sleep on his own bed. So we just bonded really, really fast. And it was the first dog that it was mine, that I took care all the time, that it was my responsibility to make sure he was healthy. It was my responsibility to come back and take him for a walk. It was my responsibility to feed him. So we just bond really deeply on all of that. Plus, I was 15 hours away from home. So he kind of became my family just because I didn't have anybody there to go through that with me besides my roommates. So he was kind of like my family. And then every time I would go home, he would come with me. So 15 hours in a bus, and he would be in a carrier and he would just come with me. So he knew through day one, I started feeding him inside the carrier. So he would, get used to being in the carrier, and he just did amazing. He would just walk in as soon as I started putting my suitcase together. He would just enter his carrier and be like, yeah, we're going, you're not leaving me behind. We just had this deep bond that I just can't explain.
And did you get him when he was 7 weeks, 8 weeks, or was he grown?
Yeah, he was 8 weeks when I got him. So he was fairly small. The difference between US and Brazil in other senses, we have a lot of a virus going around. So it's just a disease that causes cowers or diarrhea in animals. And it's very severe in Brazil to a point that they will die in a couple days. So I was so afraid that he could get something because we have so many stray dogs just roaming around that I didn't take him out of the house until he was fully vaccinated at 6 months. So through all of that time, I lived in an apartment. So he learned how to use pads. He would only pee on pads because I was so scared of taking him out and he would catch something, especially because he was a purebred animal that usually to me, they're more sensitive. So I was so scared that he could get any disease that I just kind of lock him home. I would not even touch the strays at that time because I was so scared. And at the same time, I was going to vet school. So I had contact with animals that were sick. So I would come home and strip all my clothes in my front door, just after I came in, and then take a shower and then go talk to him. I didn't even touch him because I was so scared that he was going to get sick. So I had all this very concern about him getting sick when he was young. So we just really bonded on that.
And so for the first 6 months, it was really just you and him. Did he have any exposure to anybody else, or it was just you and him?
No. So I lived with 2 roommates. So they had contact with him most of the time. And one of my roommates had a dog, but it was all vaccinated dog. So I wasn't super concerned about her dog. So they had this acclimation to each other, but I didn't do a lot of socialization with him because I was so scared of him getting something. So he would only approach animals that I knew were fully vaccinated and they would bring to our house. But I was still afraid that they could catch something. So I was very much like, well, they need to be fully vaccinated to be exposed to him. And I was just like kind of like a freak on nobody touches him, which I think that's how people do with babies too.
I mean, he was your baby.
Yeah, he was my baby. He was my first baby. Yeah.
So what did life look like with Dexter in veterinary school? I mean, obviously we know how rigorous veterinary school is. So what did that look like?
So he was my best buddy on everything. When I graduated, I actually have pictures of him wearing a hat because I was like, well, you deserve a vet degree too. Because he sat with me for like every single test I had to study. And he was very much like, he had his schedule. So if I was studying after hours, he would come with his blankie and be like, hey, we need to go sleep. And I'm like, I can't because I have to study. So I had to like put a chair with his bed on top. So he would lay by me because he would not go to bed without me. But he just went through vet school through and through with me. So when I got him, I was in my probably second year of vet school. So just like starting the basics of physiology, more deep anatomy, and just learning a little more. So he was all through that with me. On third year of vet school in Brazil. So in Brazil, it's a little different. We don't do undergrad. We go straight to vet school. So it's just more intense. It's the entire day classes. And I had to take a bus. I never had a car. So I felt bad that he was home. But on my third year, we started doing clinics and he would come to the clinic with me. So if we had to do any, clinical skills, just learn how to like collect blood or do physical examinations, he was like my model to it and to my group. So I have a couple pictures that you can see that we're holding him and like doing. So I did like a skin test on him. We would do everything. So he was so okay with vet treatment because he was always at the hospital. He knew everybody. He knew all my professors. And then by year 4 and 5 is when I started doing internships. And some of my internships required that I stayed at the hospital at night. So because I had him and I didn't want to leave him alone, I would take him with me. So I have like pictures of him inside the lockers. He was just like there for everything I've done in vet school. He was my best buddy. Like we would do everything together. The bus driver knew him because I had to take him on a bus to go to the vet school. Everybody knew him. So he was kind of like a celebrity. And he, of course, as being a pug, had a lot of like health issues and he had some skin problems. He would go to the vet school and get his physicals done by the other students and he would be fine with it. So he just went through and through vet school, like he did everything. So I thought that when I graduated, I was like, well, he deserves to receive the degree with me because he has been through everything as a vet student would. He was my support, I would say, like just having an emotional support dog at that time wasn't even talked about having an animal that was emotional support, but at the time that's what he was for me. He was just there for everything.
And what year was this? Like when did you go through vet school?
From 2011 to 2017. So I did 1 year of an exchange program in the US in the middle of it. So I did 2011 to 2017 in August. And that was the other thing that really weighed on me when I came to the US for my internship. I couldn't bring him with me because he was heavier than what they would allow on the airplane. So he would have to go under. And I was so afraid that it would not have enough oxygen that it was just not an option for him to come with me at that time. So he stayed with my mom. But I remembered that it was either you would be selected to come a year or a year and a half or 2 years, something like that. And I was like, if they select me to go 2 years, I'm not going to go because he will only live like about 8 years and I'm going to lose 2 years of his life. So I didn't want to come because I was like, I don't want to lose those years of his life. I just don't want to do it. And so I ended up coming for only a year, which was kind of good.
That must have still been hard, a year away from him.
Yeah. And that time we didn't had a lot of like means to to talk on video. So we only had Skype, and we had to like make sure that my mom had a good connection. I had a good connection so I could see him, to be able to have that connection even though I was away. But my mom did a wonderful job. She was just in love with him. And when I went back, she's like, I'm going to take him somewhere that he can sign with his paw and say he wants to stay with me. And I'm like, no, Mom. It's coming with me. He's my baby.
So what was it about Dexter that drew so many people to him? Like your mom got very bonded to him. Sounds like people that went through veterinary school with you and your professors were very bonded. Like what was it about him?
He was just a very well-behaved animal, I would say. Like I didn't have to work really hard to train him. He was the first dog that I actually like did training. Like he knew all commands and he was very good at he was your shadow. Like he would go with you anywhere. So if I was to go take a shower, he would go with me. Anywhere I would be in the house, he would be with me. He was like attached. So he would do that to other people too if I wasn't around, or he was just very like charismatic, I would say. I think part of it is also like how he kind of looks like a human on his face. So he had such expressions for everything that you would do that it was just so easy to bond with him. But I think the biggest thing was just like his personality, his temperament of being such like a good dog. And he would just, he was just like nice to everybody. He was very well behaved, easy to train. And I think people just like got kind of drawn into him because he was so nice, such a nice dog, such a lovely dog that it's kind of how things went with him, I guess.
I also love that you use like an adjective like charisma, because I just think about like 50 years ago to say an animal was charismatic. It just would be such a strange thing to say, but like it makes sense. Like I can absolutely picture a dog being just charismatic and like playing to the crowd and like drawing people in with their personality. But it's just so funny, like how far we've come from, we don't know if animals are sentient, or we don't know if they have like emotions, or like at least more deep emotions like grief or guilt or those types of things, to now we're like, it's just so normal to say terms like, oh, they're charismatic, or like, yeah, I don't know. I love that.
Yeah, one thing going through vet school at 2011, which is completely different than right now, they had that view that animals could not recognize themselves, so they would not think. And I remember one day going to the store and they had a magazine saying that they proved that animals actually can recognize themselves, not as we do, but like by smell, by just smelling each other or smelling their own smell and their own pee, that type of things. And I remember taking that magazine, and it was like a very scientific based magazine we had in Brazil. And I was like, I can't believe people thought animals did not recognize or weren't able to think. That to me is just like completely nuts.
Yeah.
Because he would, like, if I'd stayed out of the house for 10 minutes, I would come back and he would be like the happiest dog ever. So I'm like, he recognized me. He recognized people that he's used to. So like, how can you guys say that they are not thinking? It's just, it didn't make sense to me how that would happen. And I think the difference between him and other dogs that I had is just, he would be the same to pretty much everybody. He would like party for any person that would come through the door, which like my dogs right now, one of them is not like that. And I think it just makes a lot of sense to me that she's very lovely and attached to me, but she's not like that to every single person she meets. But he was, and I think that is what draw people to him, just being that happy about seeing anybody. Like he would cry and, just like be so happy to see you. And it was amazing to have that. It was just a feeling of being loved, like giving love to an animal, but also like receiving that back. It was just awesome.
Just unconditionally too. It's like they love you whether you're spending a full day at vet school and you come home, they still love you. Even if you are, I don't know, my lab maybe was not so happy if she was 10 minutes late to dinner, but like like it's just this unconditional love from them. You can have a bad day, you can have a good day. They still look at you as if you're like the greatest thing.
Yeah, and sometimes like you're not feeling good yourself and you're not being like super good to them because you're just not feeling good, and they don't hold you against that. Like they will still love you through that, and they will forgive you for anything. Like, oh yeah, you were 10 minutes late for food. Well, and as soon as they eat, they don't care anymore. It's just not something they will hold against you. And I think that is the difference between humans and dogs. It's just dogs will love you through all. Even dogs that people like just tie them outside, they still like bond with the person that comes and like gives them food, even though they don't have the best welfare at that time. They will still love that person, which to me is crazy that they would do that. You know, they will still love you no matter what, which is, it's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. So shifting gears a little bit, you'd mentioned a couple times about the health issues that exist with pugs. And I don't know that that's super common knowledge to everybody. Are you comfortable maybe talking a little bit about what some of those health issues look like with the brachycephalic breeds?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is what you just said. They are brachycephalic, which means that they were bred so much to look more human and have that big eyes and that like short nose that we end up creating some problems with that process. So in case of pugs, they have a long soft palate, which is just the soft part of your mouth inside of your mouth that it's too long. So it ends up occluding the passage of air. So they will do like almost like a cough that we say like it's an inverse cough to try to get that piece of the soft palate out of their airways. So they have that problem. They are not very good at exercising because there's not enough air coming in of that short nose. We have problems with eyes. So the eyes got put so outside that sometimes we have animals popping their eyes out where they need to have enucleation. There's some other eye problems where because of the eye being too big and too outside, they get dry so much that you start having some eye problems. And Dexter, if you would observe his eye, he had a little bit of like a dark spot coming in. And what we thought was because he had that big skin fold on top of his nose because he doesn't have a nose that was like scratching into the eye and creating some problems in his eyes, which wasn't a bad problem at that time, but it could become an ulcer or something bad. The other problem that they have because of the nose being so inside the face is that the opening for the airways is so small that not enough air comes in. And that's why like those type of breeds are the ones that snore and then you can hear them breathe so bad. So he had all of those problems because he was a pug. But overall, for a pug breed, he was good. Like he had a little bit of a snout. It wasn't too occluded. He never like passed, just like had a syncope episode where they just like pass out and then come back. He never had that. So he was able to run. I have like videos of him that just running with one of our other dogs. Like he was okay. But because he had all of those problems, for example, in Brazil, it gets really hot during summer. I would have to wait until like 7 p.m. so I could walk him outside because I was kind of concerned that he was going to overheat. And then I had to be very like aware that I couldn't do really long walks with him or go for a run because he would not, he doesn't have a way to cool off because dogs have some sweat glands, but not even close to humans. So he just didn't have that ability to sweat it off. So the main way that they exchange heat is through their mouth and through just opening mouth respiration, which is already hard for that breed. The other big problem that he had was skin problems. So one of that, he had always fungus growing on his folds. So since I got him, I would clean his fold and put like some oil to help with the just scratching between the two folds. Because of that, then he ended up developing some ear problems, so ear infections. And then the other problem that they have with their ear channel is because their head got squished, they have a longer channel with hair inside. So water gets trapped there and then they end up having infections a lot easier than other dogs. Anyways, those are a lot problems. The other thing that it's common with those breeds because they kind of got shortened and fat over time. So pugs and bulldogs are very predisposed of being overweight and having problems with that. So I was always like on top of his diet, making sure he didn't overeat. He didn't get any type of human food just to make sure that he was good. And then their legs get shorter. So the ratios between the bones get kind of off. So they start having some problems on their elbows and also on their knees. So there's all these problems going on with those animals that you need to be aware. So I was always like, if you want to have this type of animal, if you want to have a pug because you like the breed, or it's just something you need to be aware of, and that it's going to be costly to make sure that the animal has a good life and a good health, because you're constantly making sure that they are on their best weight and they're not overweight, and you can only walk them this certain time, and you need to make sure that their folds are clean. So I think that is also something that really made me bond to him, because the care that I had to give him was very intense.
Yeah, sounds like it. And then I know there are certain individuals that actually these issues with the soft palate and the stenotic nares require surgical intervention for them to be able to get air in their body and get them to breathe properly. I'm assuming Dexter was not one of those cases that would have needed that.
Yeah, so what happened was I wanted to do the surgery on him. I wanted to open his airways a little bit and do the soft palate surgery. And I talked to my professor at that time. She's a really good surgeon. And she told me, okay, so what is his trait influencing on his life right now? Is he able to do all of his behaviors? Is he able to go outside and play? Does he have any type of things that are interfering besides just snoring or having some of the coughs? And he didn't. So she told me she wouldn't do it on him just because it's such a hard recovery, that she thought that would not benefit him overall. You know, it could a little bit, but she was just like, I don't know if I want to put him through this such an invasive surgery if he's not showing signs that this is actually affecting his overall health and his overall welfare. So we decided not to do the surgery, but I would take him to the vet school for literally anything I saw wrong with him. So she was also an orthopedic surgeon. And one time we were on orthopedic surgery part of the surgery class. And I told her, I was like, hey, I've seen him stand up and he kind of kicked his knee back. So I think he might have like a dislocation of his knee or something. So she's like, yeah, just bring him to the exam room. We're going to take care of him during class so you can learn stuff on your own animal. And I was like, okay. So I brought him. We did all the examinations that we already done on him like multiple times, because he would come and help with clinics, and we couldn't find anything. And so we decided, okay, let's take him to x-ray. And he was the best boy at x-ray. Like I just hold a treat and he lay down there for the x-ray. So everybody was super impressed, because usually they hate doing x-ray. You need to be so still. He was fine. So I got like all the professors like, oh my God, he's so good. Like he just lays there. And I'm like, yeah, if you have a treat, he'll do anything for you. Then we look at the x-ray, also couldn't find any like really bad thing going on with his knees. But she told me, because I watch him so closely all the time, that is probably something that would become a problem if he would get older. So just to keep an eye on him and making sure he was doing fine. And that's what I've done. But I also like, whenever I was in an apartment, I would walk him down. Like I would carry him down so he would not have, the impact of going downstairs, while I would be fine with him coming up because there's less impact in that. So I was just very like almost too much caring, I would say, for my animal, but I didn't want him to have any problems before time. So that's what I've done.
Oh, like I'm exactly the same way with my animals. Like if there is a slight deviation in their normal behavior, I'm like on the phone with the vet, like they need to be seen. Oh my gosh, yeah. No, it's
Yep.
there. I totally understand. And it's so funny about the x-ray. This dude here, Frank, he just had to get x-rays done and they had to do like full sedation. There was no way he was going to stay for an x-ray. So that's awesome that Dexter didn't need to do any of that.
Yeah. I think because he grew up inside the vet school and like he knew people around and, he just didn't really care. So I put him down. Like I was like, hey, I have a treat for you. Just lay down. And then I was in the gown all dressed up. So I could be there
Nice.
with him, which I think also made a lot of difference. Just having someone that he was used to. And also like his vet was there. She was the one that did all like his clinical examinations, his vaccines, everything. So he was just home, I would say. So he didn't care much about like what was going on because all his people were around him and he was just
He
good.
just seems so perfect.
He was the best boy ever.
So fast forward a little bit. You graduate vet school with him, or you had your pictures taken at least with him?
Yeah. So I had my pictures taken with him my last year of vet school. We do pictures just before we do our externship. So that would be 6 months into my 5th year of vet school, just before we go to externships. So we took pictures. So I have pictures of him in like a vet hat, graduation hat. We did all that. And then I actually went to Rio for my externship and he stayed with my mom. And at that time, I knew I was going to come back to the US to do my master's. So I talked to my mom and we were going to keep him with her. The problem was at that time, she had a female that was not spayed. And so then is where things kind of got sad because I came back from my externship and I told my mom, I was like, because he's staying with you, I want to get him neuter and I want to make sure we neuter him now because of the problems that come with not having an animal neuter, prostate problems and litters that we don't want. And just all of the other things that come with having an animal that is not a neuter. Could be cancer of their testicles. There's so many things that impact their life. But for the longest time, I didn't castrate him just because they tend to get overweight when they are castrated. So I wanted to avoid that. And also we had a couple litters of him because he was a good breed of, pugs. So that is the reason we didn't do earlier. So I came back from the externship and I told my mom, I need to get him neuter. I don't want to live him with you and then he become a problem if he has like a prostate cancer or you get more litters that you don't want. So I decided to go with a vet from my town just because I didn't want to transport him back to my university town. Honestly, I don't know why I did that. At that time, I just thought it was a good option.
Your university town you said was 15 hours away.
Yeah.
Oh, Eduarda, it's hard.
So I took him to the vet and I was like, hey, just want to make sure you guys are doing an anesthesia that is with ventilation because he's a pug and he cannot go into just having like IV anesthesia. He needs to be on ventilation all the time. He has a soft palate. And they're like, yeah, we do all that. He's going to be on isoflurane, which is one of the anesthetics we have. So I thought, well, this is the best vet in my town. They have all the equipment. So I took him there. He got his pre-anesthesia medication, got into the surgery room, and I left. So they called me like 30, 40 minutes later, and they're like, hey, Dexter is out of surgery. He's good. So you can come pick him up at noon. And I was like, okay. So I felt like this relief of everything went fine. Because when you're a vet, you know that stuff can go wrong on anesthesia, surgeries, any of that. So I just felt good about like coming back and pick him up. So I went there to pick him up and I knew something was wrong because they're like, Eduarda, you need to sit down. And I was like, why? And he's like, unfortunately, we lost him like a couple minutes ago. And I just lost my ground. It was so bad. And I was trying to be nice to the vet because I know how it is to lose an animal, as being a vet is also painful to you. And I know it wasn't something that he wanted to happen. But so I went in and I checked him out. He was there and he's like, okay, so what do you want to do? Do you want to do a necropsy on him just to make sure he didn't had any like heart problems? And I told him, I was like, I know he didn't had, because he has been through vet school with me. We have done every single type of test in him and he does not have any problems. So he's a healthy dog. He was a healthy dog. And he's like, I think we should do a necropsy. So I signed the papers to do a necropsy. I have no idea how I drove back to see my mom. And I know coming back to my mom and I'm like, just died, Mom. I don't know what happened. So I felt so guilty that I took like my healthy animal and he passed away. And I was like a vet and I didn't protect him. You know, I felt really bad that I just didn't protect my animal. It was hard that day. I had to go home. My mom was just trying to comfort me, but she was suffering too because we were so attached to him. And it was just so hard. So I brought like his little collar home. And every time I would like touch the collar, I would just break crying. So my mom had to like hide it so I would not see it. But anywhere I would look at the house, I would see him, like his bed, his food bowl, the couch where he liked to lay down, like the bed. And the day before going there, we were watching a TV show, like me and him, and I could never finish that TV show because every time I open, it just like it hurts me. So I just never finished that. And it was just a bad day for me, just really, really bad. I felt so guilty for taking him there and putting him through that. And I was like, I just lost, because he was 6 years old and their lifespan is about 8. And I was like, I lost 2 years of you because I took you to get neuter. So it was rough. It was very rough. And at that time, I was about to graduate and come to the US. And my first thought was like, I don't want to do anything else. I just want to lay here and die with him, you know. But then I thought, I'm not going to be doing him any good if I quit my life. That the only reason I took him to get neuter is because I was leaving the country. So if now I don't do that, I'm not doing him justice, you know. I'm just going to like quit and his life will be, there's no meaning of it. If I don't go now, I have to go. So it was very hard for me to just, you know, move on. And I remember that night, my mom was like, what do you want to do? And it's funny how at that time religion kind of came to help me. In Brazil, we have a lot of spiritism, I would say. So it's just basically that our souls evolve. So we start as really like, I don't know, we start with like bacteria and we grow through that. So my mom was like, hey, I'm going to take you to this place. And I remember I was wearing black because that's how I felt. I just felt like I needed to mourn him. And we got there and they're like, hey, Eduarda, you cannot go in because only people wearing like light colors can go in. So my mom had to go back, take different clothes for me so I could go in. And we went in and it was like a beautiful celebration. And that at the end, they just give you like, they will pray for you. A lot of people will like go around you and pray for you. And they didn't know why I was crying. Like they had no idea, but they told me like things that I needed to hear. Like you need to forgive yourself. What you're feeling right now is just a feeling of mourn and sadness, and you need to let this go. Whatever happened to you was not your fault. So they gave me like this little thing to pray every night, and it was basically like I had to say, I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. And I don't know, that just played like a really good role in my life at that time, that I had to forgive myself because I think I was really, really hurting because I was blaming myself for his death. So that played a big role in my life of like getting back in my feet and moving on. But then I would just go home and cry all the time because that's all I could do. And I remember my brother was 11 at the time, and I told him, I was like, when is this gonna stop hurting? And he looked me in the eye and he's like, when you forgive yourself. And I felt that that was like so deep for an 11-year-old to tell me. And I was like, well, I need to like move on. And at that time, the good thing was we had his babies. So we had 2 of his babies at home. And my mom said, we're going to keep one just in memory of him. So we still have him. And I think they also helped me go through the mourn process of having like a piece of him that was there and I could touch it, you know, so he wasn't gone forever. They were there to help me through it, but it was hard.
Your mom still has him?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so I'm excited that I get to go home and see him this time. He's still there, and then her dog is also still there, and she's a pug too. So I think that is really nice that I get to go and see them.
I'm so sorry. Like I wish I didn't know the pain, but I do, and there's nothing to say. There's nothing to make it better. It's just this overwhelming darkness when you lose a soulmate, really.
And it's been like 7 years and I still cry. I just can't. And it took me like, I think it took me a year to be able to look at his pictures without breaking down. So I remember after he passed, I still had to defend my vet school, because in vet school, you need to defend your final internship. So it's almost like your defense as your master's here. So you present what you did on your internship, and then you present 2 cases and how you treat those animals, and just relate back to like the scientific part of it. And I just didn't know how I was going to do it. You know, I just didn't. I was like, I have nothing in me left. So I had to travel to my university town, which breaks my heart. I couldn't walk in front of the building we lived, just because it just remind me so much of him. And I'm like, I just can't do it. So I end up not visiting like my neighbors or anything, because I just couldn't do it. And then going to the hospital where I had to defend, where we had so many good memories. It was just really, really tough. And my professor was like, just write so you can honor him, you know. And I got a lot of questions about like, why'd you do that? Why'd you take him to a vet that was not his vet? And I just didn't have an answer. Like, I don't know why I did it. It was like, I wish I would have taken him to my university, because I know everybody. I know they would take good care of him. I just don't have an answer for why I did that.
But also the reality is you could have taken him there, and unfortunately the same thing
could happen.
There was no telling. There was no crystal ball that could tell you what would have happened.
Exactly. So it was a tough time. And then I remember that usually when you finish, you put a picture of either your friends, your pets, so you can say like, thank you for presenting. And I couldn't. I put a picture of the town, because if I put a picture of him, I would cry. And sometimes on being a vet, crying is bad, is seen as a weakness. So I didn't want to show my weakness at the time. I was like, I'm just gonna, power through this in his honor of getting myself graduated from vet school, because he deserves it. And I'll just power through this. And I end up like, I think my grade at the end, because in Brazil we go from 0 to 10. I think I had a 9.8 or something. So I was proud of myself that I did that for him, that I like managed to write a thesis or, a conclusion work while I was in so much pain, and just finishing strong for both of us. But it was rough. It was really rough.
I can imagine. My gosh.
And then explaining to everybody that I took him someplace else, was the hardest thing, because in my mind, I always had like, you should have known better. Like, you should have known better. Like, you're a vet. You should have been like, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to watch you through the process. But I don't know. I felt like I did what I was taught to do, which is just trust the vet. Trust the vet of your animal. Trust that they are in the best care. So that's what I've done. So I was trying to be as professional as I can, because in the vet world, we're very bad. We're just bad at like talking bad about each other instead of helping each other. So I didn't want to do that to that person. I wanted to support him and just let him do his job.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, something bad happened. But again, it could have happened anywhere. Maybe if I did the surgery of his palate before and his nose, that could have happened earlier. So I was kind of glad that I didn't, because then maybe I got a couple more years with him.
Have you forgiven yourself?
Yeah,
Good.
I did. It took me a couple years, but I did. It wasn't my fault. And I think I just see as it was the end of a cycle in my life. It's almost like it had to happen. And my mom played a big role on it, where she said, I'm not glad that this happened, but I'm glad you were here. Because what if something happened and you were in the US and you couldn't come back? You would have blamed yourself a lot more. So at least you're here and you were able to go through it with him. Like you did, like you spent the best time with him. You got to say goodbye. Like you were here for that. So I think that helped me a lot. But when I got to the US after losing him and starting my master's program, I had bad days, Abbie, like just days that, I would break down crying. And one thing that I've learned is that sometimes writing stuff down helps. So I even tried to find it, but I wrote him a letter.
Oh.
And I put in one of my books with that praying that I learned to like forgive myself. And I remember saying like, I'm sorry that I did that to you. I'm really sorry that I put you through that. That wasn't the outcome I wanted. I want you to stay with me. I wanted you to be here for me, but I forgive myself. I never thought that could happen. So I wrote him that letter, and I was like, I just want to tell him that, because for the longest time I would close my eyes and I would picture him dead at the table, and that just like killed me, because just looking at something you love that is just like without life, it's so painful.
Yeah.
So my other thing was to change that image in my life. So in my mind, and just whenever I thought about him like entering heaven. So like just running towards like a garden or a place that is beautiful. So I had to like train my mind to not go that route, to not go to seeing him in that table without life and just seeing him going to heaven. So that helped. And now like I don't blame myself for that anymore, but still hurts. And I feel like it will hurt forever that happened.
So what was the time frame between his passing and you coming to the US?
Fast. I think he passed in May. I came here in August.
Oh my God.
He passed in May and I defended in July.
Oh my God, Eduarda.
So it was a very short period of time, and I put myself through a lot of like stress over that time of trying to get everything ready to come here. That's when I start having, which that's something on my health, but I have pseudo seizures. So in July of that year, I had my first one. I just fell to the ground and had a seizure and like hit my head really hard in the ground and got cut. So I had to go to ER, get stitches, did MRIs, did everything you can imagine. They can't find anything wrong with me. I think it was just like a high period of stress for me on like losing him, finishing up vet school, changing countries, like all like on top of each other. I reset it, I just like blacked out and needed a new beginning. And I think that is what happened to me at that time. It was so much that my body was just like, let's shut down for a little bit, which sometimes talking to people that don't have animals or never had this type of connection, they think you're crazy, or like, how can you treat that as a loss of like you would be of someone of your family? But it is. I have no explanation for it. Like my pain was very much like losing someone in my family. It was just, and I tell everybody, and I'm like, I don't care what you think. Emotional pain is the worst pain ever. Someone can come and break all your limbs, and yeah, it's going to hurt like physically. Emotional pain is the worst, because there's nothing you can do that will decrease that. There's just nothing you can do.
Yeah.
So to me, after I lost him, that is like, if you ask, what is your biggest fear? My biggest fear is losing people I love, because I'm going to be here and I'm going to feel that. So it's just the pain of it is so big that it's the worst pain ever. And that's where like I started thinking about animal welfare a lot more, because we're so concerned about physical pain. We're so concerned of things that we inflicted on the animal, and we just don't look at what is the emotional pain of that animal? What is their state? Because that is where I suffer the most. So I feel like that happens to them too. And we just ignore because we can see it.
Yeah. I think honestly that's what has inspired me to do this podcast, is to use it as a platform to show people that these are more than just a dog or just a cat or just an animal. Like, these are a part of us. And the pain of losing Amira was as real and as profound as the loss of anything I'd had up to that point. And I mean, there's no bereavement for losing a pet. It's like, take a weekend and get over it. And exactly what you're saying, it's 6 months down the road, a year down the road, multiple years down the road of losing your animal. It's hard to tell people, like, I'm having a bad day because my dog passed away 3 years ago and I'm still mourning her loss. It like, there just isn't that social awareness of like, this is the same thing as saying like, I lost a child. I mean, I guess maybe I shouldn't say the same thing.
It's similar for sure. It's just painful. And I've had those talks before, just talking about him with people. And in one of my trips to Brazil, I sat down with a doctor that takes care of newborn babies. And I told her, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to have a kid. Because if this is the type of pain I went through with my animal, I can't even imagine how much is the pain of a mom losing their child. It's just unbearable. Like, I don't know how you follow in life after that. Like, you probably do to honor their history, like I felt like I had to do. But it's so painful. It's such a painful time that you don't know that you're gonna like be able to get out of that. I felt like when he died, like something in me died too. I just felt like hollow and like, what is the meaning of everything I'm doing? Like, where am I going? Why do I do this? And like, just have no shine. And I think it's just stages of mourning, but just like, why does my hair matter? Why does taking a shower matter? You know, like, what does this matter? Nothing matters. It was just such a, like, something in me died. And I don't think I will ever recover that. It's just something that died and it will never be the same.
Yeah, and there's also this guilt associated with like enjoying life without them. Like,
Yes.
it's like,
Yeah.
how can I be happy anymore? Because being happy was something I shared with this animal, and even little moments of happiness there, at least with me, there was like this immense guilt after of like, how can you be happy? How can you smile? How can you laugh?
I felt the same. Like, how can I be happy? Like, I feel like I'm betraying you if I am happy. Or like, to me, getting a new dog was so hard because I didn't want anybody to replace him or, you know, to take his place, or I didn't want to forget about him. That's my thing. I feel like with years go by, which that happens to people too. Like, I can't remember my grandfather's voice, even though I lived with him. So that memory starts to getting lost, and I just didn't want to lose those memories because that's what was making me go through life, is just having those memories of him. So I had like the worst guilt of, I don't want to have another animal because I'm going to be betraying you. And this animal will never be you, you know? So just having that really painful moment of like, I don't know what to do now. And so it took me another year to be able to, almost a year, to adopt another animal because I just couldn't. I didn't feel ready for having someone in his place. So until I got my next animal, which is Rio, and then I was like, it's not a substitution. Like, there's enough love in me to love another animal that needs my love. So I had to go through all of those realizations of the love that I had for Dexter is not going to be moved now to Rio. Like, I still have the love I had for Dexter here. It's not going to go anywhere. But I have so much love that there's space for my other animals to be in my life. And it's not going to affect how much I remember my dog and how much I love him.
Dexter would want you to give that love that you gave to him to another animal. Like he had the best mom. And so he wants his mom to have, or he wants another animal to have that love too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt that as soon as we adopted Rio, I was like, this is almost like a love at first sight. Like, I just felt that. I felt that I needed to give my love to another animal, and he would never judge me for that. That's just how animals are. They will never judge you for that.
Let's talk about your more current life with animals and your professional, personal life. What has that been like?
Yeah. So after Dexter died, I did everything in vet school basically towards small animals. My goal is always to help small animals, always to work with dogs and cats. And then I remember when I came back to present my defense, we had to put animals under anesthesia, and that just kind of triggered me really bad. Just seeing animals kind of like floppy, they're just under, so they are not the same as they would be if they were not under anesthesia. So I thought, I'm already going to a program where it's geared to livestock. I should give livestock a chance. I should see if I like that, because I don't know how much I can relate. Like, I will relate too much to people that lose their animals, because that is a thing you lose through vet school, is almost you lose a little bit of your empathy, because you have to separate that so you don't suffer all the time of like having losses. And I was having a hard time to do that separation. So I would suffer the same way if it was my animal, which was really, really painful. So I was like, well, since I'm going to a master's geared to livestock, I should give livestock a chance. And in the beginning it was hard because my view of animals is always individualized animals instead of populational medicine. So I had a really hard time doing that transition between small animals and livestock animals on just like, we're not going to treat this animal individually. We're going to treat the population. It took me a little while to change, but I got a chance to do my projects with calves, and I had the chance to treat them as individuals. So that just like really sparked something in me that I could make a difference to help farmers improve their management of their animals. And I feel like calf ranches or cow-calf production, the farmers really care about their animals. They really care about like one calf that is sick. They will do anything for that calf to like be nursed back into health. And I would say like, hey, what do you guys think if we do this for this animal? And they would be like, yes, let's do it. Let's see if we can make it. So I think that like changed my view of livestock, and I really got into helping management of those animals, and not only like health, but trying to look at like, how can we make their lives better overall, and not just do the basics for them. Like, how do we improve their life overall? And that just started like gearing me into the animal welfare side of things, where I'm not just doing my duty of being a vet and keeping the animals healthy, but also like, how do we prevent that? How we use management skills, how we use animal behavior to help prevent disease, so we don't have to even treat if we're preventing. And that's where I was like, that's what started moving me into just going through livestock production and just like gearing myself into the animal welfare world, just doing that for the benefit of the animal and also for the benefit of the farmer, just seeing their animals doing better.
And obviously that master's turned into a PhD.
Yeah, the master's turned into a PhD, and I kept doing the same thing, kept going back to ranches, had a good opportunity to go to my advisor's ranch, which I think also biased me a little bit because they are such good animal producers. They care so much about their animals, especially because of their harsh weather and how they can provide a better life for their animals, their cows and everything. And it made me happy working with them, and it made me happy to see that livestock people are actually interested in making the life of the animals better. So sometimes I tend to say, if you don't like animal production, you should go and visit a ranch. You should go visit how much they work for those animals, because ranch life on the cattle side, it's not easy. It needs to be something you really like to do, because you have no holidays, you have no time off. Your animals still need to eat. Your animals still need to be taken care of. So it would be way easier to go to a job that you can do, 7 to 5 p.m. and just go home. That doesn't happen when you're working with livestock. So they need to love that. I would say, yeah, partially is pay their bills, but also there's years that it does not pay their bills, because you have nature, you have disease, you have other problems that are out of your control, and they keep doing that because it's what they love. So that really changed my view of livestock production. And granted, there's a lot of things we can improve in all of the livestock productions. There's always something that we could do to improve or make it better. But I think if people could go out and see how much farmers work, that would kind of change their minds too, of how much they love what they do, and they have to, because it's such a hard work to do.
So your professional life is very much now focused on large animal welfare.
Yeah.
And then what does your personal life look like?
So my personal life looks kind of crazy right now. I have one too many animals. I have 2 dogs. One is a border collie mix bred. He's a mutt. And I have a border collie smooth coat. So they're both very energetic dogs. They both play frisbee. They compete with my husband. They just love to do exercise, go to the lake and, just go swimming. And then I have 5 cats. So all my cats are rescues. They are just animals that needed some love, and they end up in my care, and they just never leave. So I'm just praying that no more cats showed up at my door, because we have too many cats.
And you have no self-control. You'll just bring them right in.
I have no self-control. I'm they needed a life. I'll work a lot to pay the things for my animals. The best ration, the best everything.
I think that we had a conversation about, because you had met Luis when you were here, even though you're both from Brazil, you guys had met in the US. And he had never had the opportunity to meet Dexter. But I remember we had a conversation where he had said to you, I feel like I know him, or I feel like I knew him.
So he didn't get a chance on when we first met, because we were a year in the US. But I talk about my pug all the freaking time. And I have shirts that have pugs. I'm pretty much like you with black labs on everything you can find that has a pug, I'm going to buy it. And so I talked about my pug all the time, that even people that were not close to me on that internship would know that I had a pug, and his name was Dexter, and he was awesome. So they all felt like they knew him because I talk about the dog all the time. So Luis actually got the chance to meet Dexter when we went back to Brazil. So we have a lot of pictures of both of them, and they just loved each other. It was so cute to see their relationship. But my mom always advised any boyfriends I had, she's don't ever give Eduarda the option to choose between you and the dog, because she will choose the dog. So just don't do that. If you don't like dogs, you better just leave, because that's how she is. Like, that dog is her life, and if you ask her to choose, she will say the dog, and I would. So they were very much like aware of it as soon as they entered the family, because my mom was like, Dexter comes first and you come second. And that's how it was. So they actually got to meet after, but yeah, he knew him just from me like talking about him the entire time.
One last question before we wrap up. If you had one more day with Dexter, what would you do?
I would not take him to get neutered. I would just do what we did the day before. Just enjoy time with him. We were watching TV shows until like late night, and he was just like snoring by me, just having some quality time. I think I do that with all my animals. Like, I think that you can do anything for them. Like, you can take them to get a burger or something but I think the best thing for them is spending time with the owner. I think that's what they appreciate the most. I think you can buy anything for them, toys, or you can buy food. You can take them to, swim, which is something he likes. But I think spending quality time with you, it's always their favorite thing. There's this saying in Brazil that people say dogs. Well, it's not a say from Brazil. It's actually from Marley and I, the movie.
Oh, Marley and me, yeah.
Yeah, Marley and Me. And that says that they don't care like what type of house you have, what type of car you have, what, how much money you have. They just don't care. They just care about you. And I feel like that's what I would do with him, is just like be there and spend time with him, which I did. So that is not something I can hold against myself, because I spent that time with him and I took him there and I said bye to him before he went to surgery, and I was there for like his pre-anesthetic. So like when he went to sleep, I was there.
So it sounds like the day, not knowing that was his last day, you guys had a perfect day. Yeah.
Yes.
Aww.
Yeah, I wouldn't change anything. I think we always had like the best time when we were together, and he got to like sleep in my bed as he always did, and we just had a good time.
Was there anything before we wrap up? Anything more you want to add?
I just feel like I would like for everybody to kind of understand that this is such a deep connection, and just try to understand people, even though if you don't have animals, just understand their pain or their love. Because I feel like the hardest part of losing an animal is actually being judged for feeling the way you feel. You don't choose to feel like that. It's just something that happens because you have such a deep connection. So even though you don't have an animal, like, let the person feel what she's feeling without feeling guilty because it's just an animal. It's her animal or his animal. And they deserve that time to mourn. They deserve to feel the way that they feel because they had a life with that animal. And also, I feel like if more people would give animals the opportunity to be part of their life, everybody would be a little more happy. Because I had so many people that were like, oh, I hate dogs. Like, dogs are good outside. And then they finally adopt a dog, or their kids adopt a dog, and then they completely change their mind. So I'm like, just be open to feel that love, because it will change your life. Like, the friendship you have from an animal is nothing like having a friendship from a human, or it's just a completely different thing. And I just cannot explain it. I think that's why, like, when I hear you talk about the human animal bond, it just like, it catches my attention so much, because I can't explain, like, why do I feel like that? It's a genetic component in me that just make me bond with the animal, and then people don't. Like, I don't know why, but this is how I am. It's just, I have that connection, and I just can't explain. It's just a connection I have since I was a kid. I always loved animals. If you see my video from my graduation in preschool, they ask you, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a vet. And so, like, I had a connection to that time. And it wasn't because, like, I want to tell people that had animals. I wanted to help the animal itself. I want to be around animals. It's just that love for the animal. So I think my closing is just like, be kind. Be kind to people that are going through an animal loss. And I always tried to do that when I was practicing. Just be kind. Even though you don't know if that animal had the best life, just tell the person they had the best life they could with you, because that will change their day.
Mm-hmm. I mean, imagine if you didn't have that profound guilt on top of grief. I mean, grief in and of itself is it can bring you to your knees, but I mean, the guilt on top of the grief is just unbearable. So I completely agree with you, is be empathetic and just don't make anybody feel like anything is their fault when it comes to the loss of their animal, because they're already going to go through it, and that's just only going to make it exponentially worse.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. I feel like I know Dexter after sitting and listening to you, and he sounds like such a beautiful, sweet boy. So thank you for opening your heart and sharing your story.
Well, thank you for having me, Abbie, and letting me cry a little bit about talking about him.
I was crying right along with you. It's hard. It's so hard.
It's just very emotional, but I appreciate you having me here.
Well, now I'm ugly crying all over again. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. In the show notes, I wanted to provide a little bit of education for those that are maybe interested in learning more on a topic that we discuss each episode. And so for this episode, I've included a couple of resources regarding the brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome, which is one of the conditions that pugs are very prone to. And Eduarda discussed it a little bit in the episode. So please check out the show notes if you're interested in seeing those resources. I also have included in the show notes a pet loss support hotline that is a 24-hour hotline. So any time of day where you may feel you need help and support, please do reach out. If you're suffering and grieving, you are not alone in your grief, and there are people that are waiting to talk to you. If for some reason that hotline does not work for you, there are plenty of other options across the country. So please do a quick Google and find a hotline that may work for you and reach out to somebody if you need help. I wanted to end this episode, if I could, by talking a little bit about Marley and Me. Most of you probably know the book, or at least know the movie. I read the book for the first time when I was 15, and it really affected me then. I think it was probably the first time that I cried reading a book. And as soon as I knew that there was a movie being made, of course, I was like, oh my gosh, we need to go see this movie. It probably is the first and only time that I will be able to watch that movie. For those of you that know what happens, you know it's incredibly emotional at the end. And it probably is not something that I'm going to be able to revisit. But I actually did reread Marley and Me, now it being almost 20 years since I read it for the first time. I was just interested to see if it would affect me the same way if I were to revisit it. I will say it definitely hits differently having read it now, especially having had a lab. Amira and Marley could not have been more different behaviorally. But I think there just is something about having the same breed as the animal in the book that you're reading that makes you connect to it a little bit differently. I think what drew me to the book when I was 15, and maybe I couldn't articulate at the time, was that through this, 250, 300 page book, we see the lifespan of an animal, but we see all the life that happens in between bringing the animal home as a puppy and saying the last goodbye. And I think that it's just such a beautiful tribute to this dog. I definitely had to pause reading it for a while when Marley started to get old. Kind of like Joey Tribbiani with The Shining, I wanted to put Marley and Me in the freezer to delay what I knew was coming. But eventually I did read the rest of it, and it was brutal. It was very hard to read the end, the last few chapters when Marley gets sick and inevitably the family has to say goodbye. It's very hard anytime you have to hear that from anybody, that moment of grief. But you don't get to the quote that Eduarda mentioned in the episode unless you make it to the end. And so I wanted to leave you with it because it really is such a beautiful quote. And I do recommend this book. I mean, it's a hard read at times, but it is a really beautiful story. And so here we go. A dog has no use for fancy cars or big homes or designer clothes. Status symbols mean nothing to him. A waterlogged stick will do just fine. A dog judges others not by their color or creed or class, but by who they are inside. A dog doesn't care if you are rich or poor, educated or illiterate, clever or dull. Give him your heart, and he will give you his. See you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Animal Soulmates podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a positive rating or review. Follow us on Instagram at Animal Soulmates Pod for updates and pictures of our guests with their beautiful animal soulmates. This podcast is produced by Citizens of Sound. Our theme song is Mastering the Art by Big Score Audio. Have a story that would be a good fit for the show? Send me an email at animalsoulmatespod@outlook.com. That's Animal Soulmates with an S, P-O-D @outlook.com. Finally, are you thinking about adding an animal to your family? Why not consider adoption through your local animal shelter? There are plenty of dogs and cats just waiting to become someone's animal soulmate. See you next time.